All right. So we talked about this beforehand. Do we start at the bottom? Do we start at the top? We'll go in like this. You and I pretty much decided we have the same top five.
Pretty
Bryce
much, yeah.
Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, Hendon Hooker,
And then Hooker.
in that order. Can we agree on that?
Oh yeah, for sure. For
All
sure.
right. So let's start at the top. Bryce Young. Dude has it all except for size,
Yeah.
which is could be a big deal, could be a problem, might not be a problem at all. We've seen guys in the NFL who make it work. We've seen a lot of guys in the NFL who can't make it work. I know Panthers fans specifically will think back to this past season where we watched Baker Mayfield get the ball batted down 13 times a game. That was pretty frustrating. That made me never want to watch a short quarterback again. I'm not going to lie. But when you're talking about a guy with the intellect, the playmaking ability, the pure talent as a passer, and a Bryce Young, it's hard to say no to that. So give me your thoughts on Bryce Young, and then we'll talk about some of the scenarios in which the Panthers might be able to land this guy.
I mean, I think we've seen Bryce Young play for a while now, especially at Alabama, one of the most televised teams out there in general. We all have a general idea of Bryce Young, and it feels like we're having to poke holes to convince ourselves he's not as good as he is. That's it. It reminds me of the hands too small talk for Kenny Pickett and Joe Burrow. Granted, it's height, so it's a little more important in the end for a quarterback. But when you have somebody this talented and that has shown over and over again on the biggest stage, with especially last year, he did not have the lights out receiving core that we're used to seeing in Alabama.
Right.
And he still produced so well in that situation. And granted, I do not want to touch any member of the secondary at Alabama except for maybe Brian Branch with a 10-foot pole. I mean, their secondary was atrocious last year. And he was always having to come from either stay toe to toe or come from behind. I mean, if you look at the Tennessee game, which they did end up ultimately losing, they still put 49 points up on the board. I mean, this guy, I don't know. I see personally watching him, I see a little bit of Drew Brees in him almost to an extent. His ability to kind of make up plays as they go. And even if things start to fall apart, he always stays poised, shoulders square. He's looking downfield. I mean, he is, besides the height and the weight, he's very prototypical in the type of quarterback he wants.
It's like in Super Mario when you're big Mario and then you get hit by a bad guy and you turn to little Mario. That's kind of like what Bryce Young is to Patrick Mahomes. If you took Patrick Mahomes and turned him into a little Patrick Mahomes, then you get Bryce Young. And you make a great point. Bryce Young last year, Alabama was not a typical Alabama team. And without a star quarterback like him, they probably wouldn't have been as competitive as they were. As you pointed out, that defense gave up a ton of points. The two games they lost were shootouts in which they lost at the very end, all-time classic football games.
Yeah.
But he elevated that team to a point where they could compete in those games against a team like Tennessee, which ended up being one of the better teams in college football last year. So the playmaking ability is unreal. His ability to manipulate the pocket, those quick feet just dancing around back there, making magic happen until someone gets open downfield. And at the same time that he's doing that and those guys are trying to get open downfield, he's able to manipulate these big defensive linemen, move all around them while keeping his eyes downfield somehow. And then it's like he always finds a way to just deliver an incredible throw. Some of the greatest throws I've seen over the last 2 years have come off of this guy's right hand.
I cannot think of
jaw dropping.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I cannot think of almost any quarterback in college football I've seen that has excellent placement like him. I've seen that in the NFL to an extent, but when you look at more raw prospects in college, nobody is making these pinpoint accuracy that he does. It's wild. Absolutely wild.
Another thing about it is the anticipation that goes with it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And especially if you go back to when he was playing with Mechie and Jamison Williams last season. Um, I think back to the SEC championship game and the national championship game against Georgia when they were playing against a team that had, what was it, 5 first round players on the defense.
Yeah, and
And
more probably coming up.
right. And we see what Nolan Smith's doing right now at the combine. You The way he was able to overcome that talented defense, and the first time they played him in the SEC championship game, they destroyed him. And it was because of what he was able to do with his arm. And
Yeah.
before his receivers are even beginning to break, he's releasing the ball, and then he's putting it in a place where only they can get to it. And it was, those were some of the most impressive games I've ever seen a quarterback play, honestly.
He's such an interesting prospect because I don't know if I have a comparison to him at all. He's the size of like Kyler Murray, skinnier probably,
yeah.
And he can do things that like Patrick Mahomes can do, but then he looks more prototypical, like especially coming out of college and early Patrick Mahomes, like that week 17 start in his rookie year. Mahomes didn't exactly have
it, but it just wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't there yet. He didn't have the feet placement, and some of the mechanics were a little shaky. I don't really see that with Bryce Young.
He's very polished for a guy who's
super polished.
2 years as a starter in college and a redshirt year.
Yeah, I don't know. It really does. It shocks me. I don't know how to describe it because I'm not trying to say he's going to come into the NFL and be like, top 3 or whatever, but he is so polished. He can immediately add multiple wins off rip to any team. You place him on the Texans right now, they win 5 more games than they should.
And piggybacking off that, him being polished, a big part of that is what he's able to do pre-snap. The dude is so smart. He's so football smart. His IQ is through the charts. And like, you line up before the play, and you can see him looking at the defense, figuring out what they're doing, making all the right checks, knowing where to go with the ball, and then he's able to take advantage of that defense after the ball is snapped. I mean, if it was not for his size, we're looking at him as a generational prospect.
Oh yeah,
hands down.
If you put Bryce Young in CJ Stroud's body, we'd be talking about him the same way people were talking about Trevor Lawrence.
Oh yeah, 100%. I agree
easily. But I don't think there's much to add off that.
All we've done is talk about how amazing he is. But if the only way you can describe him is like Drew Brees with feet, with speed. And he's not an incredible runner, but he's certainly good enough to keep plays alive and take advantage of a defense who's willing to give him those alleys to run.
He's got that Houdini effect,
For sure. And that's probably the most special part of his game, honestly, is just the way he can keep a play alive, keep his eyes downfield, and make something happen. And he never panics. He's cool as a cucumber, as the boomers like to say. So we could talk about how amazing he is all day, honestly, I think. But we'll move on for everyone else's sake. Let's talk about another